This episode of Outside Insights is brought to you by Placers, a values-led staffing partner helping businesses and individuals reach their highest potential. Build a flexible workforce or take the next step in your career at myplacers.com. Welcome to the Outside Insights podcast. Our goal is to provide content and ideas that help you close your personal and professional gaps by hearing how others have done it. I'm your host, Chris Burkhard, and today we're excited to welcome Sam Calagione to the show. Sam is the founder of Dogfish Head Craft Brewery. He scaled it from his kitchen to a well-known national beer lifestyle brand, and Dogfish Head became a part of Boston Beer in 2019. Sam continues as a leading voice in that business. Welcome, Sam, to the show.
It's great to be here with you today, Chris.
Well, it seems appropriate to open with what a long, strange trip it's been, Sam. I think it's appropriate. Not only 30 plus years of entrepreneurial bliss, I'm sure. And, you know, we've got half an audio audience and half a live audience. So we've got, these aren't prop beers. They're real beers. They're Grateful Dead beers. I happen to like this pale ale a lot, by the way. And I tasted your new Citrus Daydream. It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm having. So cheers to you, virtual toast to you.
Cheers to you, virtual toast it is.
Looking forward to our chat.
What I loved, you're not shy in front of the mic. And we always have some pre-show time. And I loved that we found something that you haven't spent a lot of time talking about. And it was the notion of collaboration, the notion of partnerships, and how that's had a role in shaping what you've done. Where would you begin in that journey to talk a little bit about that? We'll unpack the founder's stuff, but let's get right into what collaboration and partnership means.
It probably came up through my love of music, frankly. And, I lived in the middle of nowhere growing up in Western Massachusetts. I was born in New York City, but my parents moved me out when I was all 1.5 years old. But I remember they gave me a boombox in the year of our bicentennial when I was like 8 years old. And I had this boombox and I would listen to the FM radio at night. And being in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't get the big city channels in New York or Boston, but out in Western Mass, there were all these colleges: Smith College, Amherst, Williams, Hampshire College, UMass Amherst. So I could get all these college radio stations, and this is right when hip hop and punk were taking off in the late 70s, early 80s. I started hearing about all these stories of these bands and the different members in their bands and their different roles in the bands. And it gave me a lot of excitement to find a creative outlet myself. And, eventually I became a DJ and got into music, but B, thinking of a business as a band and how the people in that band have to have unique roles, but play kind of with one voice on the same beat. But then watching how different bands collaborate with other bands gave me a lot of excitement to, once I started Dogfish, finding other like-minded artists who we could create collaborative scenarios where 1 + 1 = 3, something exponentially awesome comes out of being challenged by an outside voice to your own creative journey. So that's something that I've really learned a lot.
Yeah. So do you play an instrument by chance, just with all that influence? And have you ever been in a band, or like, who are you, the lead singer? Are you the bassist? I got to ask.
I'm not embarrassed to tell you I'm half of the greatest living beer geek hip hop collective of my generation, which is called the Pain Relievers. And it's myself and our brewer, Brian Selders, and he's a more talented musician than I am. He plays a bunch of instruments, whereas I write lyrics and do the rapping in our group. So if folks go to Spotify and check out Pain Relievers, RELIEVAZ, second word, you'll find a few of our songs on Spotify.
We're going to make sure we get that in show notes with that link. But my apologies to you. I did not know you were an accomplished...
Believe me, I'm keeping my day job as a brewer in case this whole rap thing doesn't take off for me. I'm keeping my day job.
I think it's good to, I'm in the staffing world, the
Yep.
world of work. I think it's important, Sam, to keep a side gig going just in case. I encourage that with just about everybody. So I'm glad to hear you're kind of doing the gig thing too, because you just never know, right?
Exactly. You don't know when this beer thing's gonna dry up.
Absolutely. I am curious. Obviously, you're on a lot of beer shows, and I can't touch that knowledge. 30 years is a long time to see an industry change shape and direction. How different is beer today from when you started this thing in 1995? And to answer that any way that interests you, but
Yeah.
just be curious about your perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen a ton of change in the 30 years, of Dogfish Head's existence, to both the beauty of coastal Delaware, an area that's dear to both of our hearts, and
Yes.
to our industry as well. And so, for example, I remember when I opened Dogfish Head in '95, we were literally the smallest commercial brewery in America. In that era, there were about 600 breweries coast to coast, and I would make the beer, and then I would bartend at night or whatever. End of the night, I'd mop up. At 1 o'clock, I'd get on my bike in Rehoboth and ride my bike down Route 1 to downtown downtown Lewis, where we lived. And on that bike ride, I'd pass mostly farmland in 1995, maybe a movie theater here, a fast food store there. But it was not built up the way Route 1 is today, with outlets, and there's just, paved parking, paved paradise, and put up a parking lot. What's
That's what
even
we
more
got today.
interesting, what's even more interesting on that bike ride, in that era, we were the only brewery in the whole state. Now, when I ride my bike between my home in Lewis and my brewery in Rehoboth, I pass 5 other breweries on my way to work. That shows
Well,
how vibrant, but also how friendly, competitive our industry's become. We started as the smallest out of 631 years ago. Now we're like a top 20 craft brand out of 10,000. American craft breweries have grown, exponentially, from 600 breweries in America when we opened to 10,000 today. So it proved to be a trend, not a fad. But if you look at it in a longer firmament of history, humans have been brewing for 10,000 years, and almost every civilization around the world, unbeknownst to each other, pre-internet, they figured out how to make beer out of whatever their local indigenous ingredients are. So I think it's more of a renaissance than a revolution. We've returned to this concept of beer being this local fabric of your community, and you go to the local brewery the way you go to a local butcher or supermarket or hair salon. So it's wonderful to be part of that kind of a community, but it certainly has moved from a niche industry, craft brewing, from when I opened, into the mainstream.
so were you the paper boy? Were you the one selling lettuce door to door? Did you always know you were entrepreneurial? Uh,
I would say my parents always instilled an interest in that. My dad was a tooth doctor, but he started his own doctor practice, oral maxillofacial practice. So, and he grew that in Western Mass to be 4 different offices in towns around that area. So he was both an entrepreneur and a doctor. My mom was a special ed teacher, and she instilled my love of creative writing and storytelling. And they were always very supportive. Any book or magazine or comic book that I wanted, they would buy for me to support my love of reading and storytelling. Whereas my dad really would put Forbes magazine in front of me and Sports Illustrated. He kind of inspired me to think about taking an entrepreneurial path. My summer jobs were working in bars and restaurants, and first, just bussing tables, and then waiting tables and bartending. So I came up in hospitality, and really I started writing the business plan for Dogfish within a year of graduating college in '92, and was working in a bar that whole year. So I've really never had another job other than the job I have today. So not much has changed.
a little bit of a coincidence. My last job before running my company was a bartender as well. So just
Oh, good.
as it's what a foundation, frankly, in
Yeah,
terms.
my wife and I tell our kids and our kids' friends, definitely at some point do a summer job in a restaurant, because hospitality really teaches you humility. It teaches you how to think on your feet. You're essentially your own boss with every interaction with every customer, and you have to, show respect, and yet professionally respect the wishes of whatever company you're working for. So we really think it's an industry that's great for anybody to come through, to learn about the real world.
Communication, memory.
Mhm. Yeah,
decision
memory.
making, service, all those
Yep.
things.
Yep.
I
Amen.
still can't remember how to make a pig squirrel, but that's a different dialogue altogether, I believe. Don't have to make many of them. All right.
Oh, no.
I'm a longtime Grateful Dead deadhead, if you will. Saw
Yeah.
Jerry and certainly saw Dead and Co. How does a collaboration? How do you work with the archivist of the dead? How does that come about? What's the genesis of that relationship?
Yeah. So at Dogfish, we've been, we're as much music geeks as we are beer geeks. And, in that context, geeks a term of endearment for our fellow geeks out there. And when we opened as the
And I want
smallest
to be
commercial,
one. By
you
that
are a geek.
definition, I want to be one.
You're a fellow geek, Chris, through and
Thank
through.
you.
But yeah, when we opened, we were not just the smallest commercial brewing in the country, but we were really the only bar in downtown Rehoboth, at least, to focus on original music. So our holy trinity
Mm.
when we opened in '95 was original beer, original food, original music. And we would only book bands until maybe the last 5 years who only played original music, no cover bands. Now we have
Okay.
a lot of fun with stuff like live band karaoke where there's cover bands and we do some other things. But for 25 years, it was only original music, which is hard to find in coastal Delaware. And sometimes we have national acts like the Strokes on their way up, or
Yeah.
Guided by Voices, or PM Dawn on their way down, maybe.
Yeah.
But we that love of music was inherent in our whole brand architecture. And so, as we started to grow in the late '90s, I would reach out to bands that I love and send them a long 2-page diatribe along with a bunch of beers in a box about why I had an idea for a collaborative beer between us and them. And it led to wonderful collaborations with Miles Davis's family
Oh,
and Pearl Jam. And it was actually the Miles Davis collaboration called Bitches Brew. There was a TV show on Discovery Channel about our collaboration with Miles and his family. And I got an email the day after the show aired, and in my e-box was an email that said from Phil Lesh, the Grateful Dead musician. And I was like, that's got to be spam. That's fake. But I
there's
opened it,
no
and
way
sure enough,
that's Phil. Yeah.
yeah, and it was. And he was like, hey, my sons and I were watching Discovery last night. We saw what you did with Miles Davis's Bitches Brew. We loved it. Would you be interested in doing a beer with the Grateful Dead? And away we went. And that was such a pure and authentic way into a collaboration with such a globally renowned artistic collective. Very different than oftentimes lawyers or business people are out trolling to try and find companies to do collaborations, and that's usually a kind of money first, art second
Yeah.
scenario. Whereas this was all about the love of the music and making a beautiful recipe together. So it started with the art, and that's probably why it's our most enduring collaboration. The first thing we did, the Grateful Dead American Beauty beer, was probably 11 or 12 years ago, and now the two beers that you and I are having are the fastest growing beers in Dogfish Head's portfolio, and both of them are part of our year-round lineup, along with our flagships like 60-Minute IPA and Sequent Ale.
Sam, it seems I was going to say it seems like in the beginning it was probably hard. Everybody wants to get on board with a winner. I mean, who wouldn't want to do a collaboration today, right? But in the beginning, there's some cajoling. You've got to probably, talk some folks into some things, or it's just different.
Yep.
But when I hear the story of Phil Lesh, you guys have been so culture forward from the beginning, so authentic. Do you feel like that Bitches Brew episode represented the culture of Dogfish Head so well that it was? I mean, the Grateful Dead is very art forward. They're not
Mhm.
never business forward. They would be
Yeah,
billionaires if they needed to be, right? There was
right.
always art forward. So isn't
Yeah.
that about culture connecting?
Yeah, totally. Culture connection and being stewards of a community, and all facets of the community. So the Grateful Dead are a great example of, allowing their fan base to tape their shows live, like I'm sure you and I saw when we went there. That's a unique thing because most bands are trying to protect their property, which is their songs. Whereas the Grateful Dead said, no, let's get our songs into the hands of the listener, i.e., in our context, the consumer, and allow them to act as evangelists for our music and share it with other people. And so it's a very long-sighted and wise way to build a community versus short-sighted, cash on the barrelhead. Every single moment, every song has to be transacted and monetized. They didn't think that way. They played the long game, created this amazing community. And the same thing for what we try to do at Dogfish Head. This weekend we have our weekend of compelling ales and spirits. We'll have thousands of people here at our campus in Milton. All of our coworkers will be working on Saturday behind booths, pairing beers and cocktails with different kinds of food with our chefs and our brewers. It's an amazingly laborious, non-profitable event because we have so much resources into it, and it doesn't extend outside of our campus here in Milton. But it creates such a great halo for our brand when they see us giving back to the community of fans that would care enough to come spend their weekend at this event at the brewery. So it's got an awesome, sort of subjective, hard to quantify karmic component on how important these kind of moments are for us, or in the case of the Grateful Dead, when they allow their fan base to tape their music and share it with other fans and not expect monetary compensation for that.
To Sam's point, like, so 17 studio albums probably have 100,000 different pressings and
Live takes, yeah.
live versions and all those things. Sam, I'm
Mhm.
curious. I'm in the staffing world. It's boring. It can be boring. We're culture forward. We try to be different. But where did the culture, where did the identity of Dogfish Head come from? Was it there in the very beginning? Was it your natural values, you and your wife, that just showed up in the business? Because obviously staying true to them has been
Yeah.
very much a part of the recipe of success. But I'm curious, did it just fall into place?
No, that's a great question. I'd say it didn't fall into place, but Mariah and I were blessed that we met really young in our lives. And her dad, Tom Draper, who started WBOC, the local TV group here, he passed young, but he was my biggest mentor for business. But he left coastal Delaware in a time when there was racial riots, and his parents shipped him off to this boarding school in New England called Northfield Mount Hermon. And Mariah grew up here in Delaware. I grew up in Western Massachusetts. My parents just happened to settle in the town next to this school, Northfield Mount Hermon. So I went there as a day student. Mariah, unrelated, went there as a boarding student, following her dad that went there. But the school is really unique. A lot of, like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners, the stereotype of a New England prep school is this super elitist, golden spoon, rich person environment that was,
Yeah.
created by rich people for rich elitist people. And that's true. I won't say names of a lot of the prep schools that kind of have that pedigree, but Northfield Mount Hermon was really unique in that was started by a preacher, a guy named D.L. Moody, evangelist preacher. And it was a prep school that for the first like 50 years it existed, it never charged tuition. It was a true meritocracy, and it would seek out really smart, gifted, hardworking inner city kids, mostly from New York and DC. They didn't care if you were black, white, women, or whatever, or if you could afford to go there, you'd get there. But you had to work when you get there. It had a
Okay.
work job. It had a farm on the campus. They made the food for the kids themselves. The kids did the laundry. The kids stoked the coal furnaces. So the mission of the school was all about centered around educating the head, the heart, and the hand. And so normal when you think about academic training in a business MBA context, that's about educating the head, right?
Yeah.
Smarts. But educating the hand was about, hey, you're going to have to get up, make the beds, do the laundry, and do physical hard work on this journey. And Mariah and I definitely took that to heart. And then educating the heart, so head, heart, and hand. That the heart was about taking what you learn and figuring out how you give back to society.
Mhm.
And so that educating the head, heart, and the hand is kind of what led Mariah and I to the culture of Dogfish Head. We had to learn how to brew and do the normal business stuff, which would be the head stuff. That we worked hard with our hands, working on the weekends, doing beer festivals, cleaning up after ourselves, and our coworkers saw that work ethic, and it was pervasive in everything that we did. But then we started Beer and Benevolence, which was our nonprofit side of our company, and as soon as we had profitability, we recognized the honor and obligation to give back to the communities that gave our company our sustenance. So we've donated over $1 million to the local chapter of the Nature Conservancy, the local arts organizations, so we were very, very active in the giving community, and that's the karma, of educating the heart so you give back to the community. All those were central values to Dogfish Head.
It's always been discussed that only an entrepreneur can create such value that they can give the value they create to better society, better the community, to the causes. And I think that's just a terrific example. And I try to study culture. I can see how, I mean, that was very foundational for you guys, and it just made sense because that hand stuff, you have to know failure to know success and to enjoy success. So to see the product of your hard work means you understand what it takes to then succeed versus just having something handed to you.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
and we've learned as much from our mistakes as we have from our successes. I'm sure that's your case as well. But to give a very poignant example, I never even graduated from that high school. I got kicked out in March of my senior year,
I knew I
and
liked you.
and and yet it's still existentially the centerpiece of my existence, that high school. And I'm on the board of directors of that school. Both Mariah and I's children went to that school. My niece will go this spring. So it's become the centerpiece of sort of our community, and how important that school's mission is to us, and we live and breathe it every day.
So being a founder, co-founder, a leader, lots of different roles, 30 plus years is a difficult journey. How would you describe your leadership style and how it's evolved over that time? I know it's an overly simplistic question to a complex answer.
Well, not too much, because I think there's leaders who can thrive in being people leaders, and nurturers, and are very organized and even-tempered, in giving feedback, giving clear direction, and then holding people accountable to the expectations. And frankly, those are not my strengths. And early on, you mentioned you wear a lot of hats as an entrepreneur, and that's we all do as entrepreneurs. And then I think the entrepreneurs that are successful to scale their businesses, be it nationally or regionally, or just call it outside of one building where there's multiple locations where there's coworkers, I think what they share, regardless of what industry they're in, oftentimes the successful ones, is they're the ones who have the humility to figure out, okay, when you're a startup entrepreneur, you have to wear a lot of hats
You don't have a
because you don't have
choice.
the cash
Yeah,
flow to hire a lot of people. But the good entrepreneurs are the ones that have the humility to say, okay, well, this hat, this accounting hat or this HR hat doesn't fit me well. I'm not good at this part of the business. I need to find somebody who has those complementary skill sets that can wear that hat well. I can take that off my hat, and I'd be glad to give some other leader that autonomy of responsibility in my company if they're good at that. And so that's what I think Mariah and I were lucky and good at, is knowing the parts of the business like accounting and HR and the regulatory environment that we didn't thrive in. And once we found leaders at our company that had those skills, we could double down on the parts that we were good at: the storytelling, creativity, marketing, community engagement, recipe development. Mariah and I had complementary skills ourselves, but that was a turning point for us when we scaled the company, is inviting these other entrepreneurially minded people into the company who were as good at what they did as we were at what we did. And collectively, we moved the company forward.
For the longest time, I found that success for me was being able to identify that complementary skill or experience and bring that person in to strengthen it. So I didn't have to do it because it wasn't a hat that fit, but you do it in the beginning because you have to.
And I
I,
bet your muscles are a lot stronger in that regard than me, because so much of your business is finding the right people for the right jobs, right?
I've got a lot of throughput.
Mm.
The parallel is I've brewed a lot of beer when it comes to people issues.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's just, but in the spirit of it, you still know what you do best, and
yeah.
that is how you ultimately do your best work, and frankly, have the most level of satisfaction with life and business. And for me, it's how I can continue this journey, and I sense that's for you as well. You're in a spot that it's always hard work, right? But you're living your life now that is you're very aligned to the role you play with your strengths and what you enjoy. That's very obvious, and that's how we sustain ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a good probably, segue into when you mentioned the evolution of my leadership journey. And I would say that, there in the era when the craft beer movement itself was growing double digits every year, and we were lucky that when we opened Dogfish and we kind of established the first sort of culinary-centric craft beer brand that did all these collaborations with bands and clothing companies and artists, we were able to carve out this national niche, even though we really didn't have national sales and marketing infrastructure and people around the country the way Anheuser-Busch or Molson or Coors did. But then when craft beer sales slowed down, we were kind of faced with the choice of, well, do we need to retract and our geography and just focus on our backyard now that beer's not growing? Or should we merge with a bigger American indie craft brewery and continue providing, our beer coast to coast and providing our coworkers opportunity to grow with a bigger company? So that led to maybe 6 or 7 years ago, Mariah and I choosing to merge Dogfish Head with the Boston Beer Company, which owns Sam Adams, Twisted Tea, Truly Seltzer. And so now we're a part of a portfolio company. It's a leap of faith because when we did the combination, we didn't take cash. We just took stock because Boston Beer is a public company. So now Mariah and I are the second biggest family owners of Boston Beer after Jim Cook, the Sam Adams founder, and his family. But it's also a big risk because I'm no longer the voting control of our brand. Jim has more stock than I do. I'm on the board of directors of the combined company with him. I have stock in the company, but not the voting stock that he has. So that was a big leap of faith as an entrepreneur that was in charge of every decision and had full, veto approval to go on this journey with another entrepreneur that had more voting power. But I did it because I trusted Jim's vision, his character, and also, frankly, it allowed me to focus on the parts of running a business or contributing to a business that I'm better at. So once we did this combination, Mariah and I didn't have to worry about bank loans. We didn't have to worry about going to Wall Street and raising money. We didn't have to worry about overseeing direct reports from the HR people culture side. We could really focus on the parts of the business that we'd add value to. And I had as much joy at a meeting this morning working on a Sam Adams beer recipe this morning as I will at a happy hour focused on Dogfish Head downstairs in a half an hour. It's actually fun now to get to work on a bunch of brands, not just Dogfish, but other artisanal brands that we own. It kind of just widens the aperture on brand building, and that's a lot of fun.
So I've got a pretty smart audience. Hopefully this will translate. There's a time and a place. You did those things, right? It was an evolution. It was a natural. It's a way to continue the journey and for Dogfish Head to continue to find a more of an audience as well, right? It's a form of growth. It's a way to keep everything going forward. And I bet you knew Jim a little bit. Like you had to have a sense that, from industry that he had to know his strength of character and felt pretty. That's got to be a big part of bringing forces together like that.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the reasons I'm so blessed, and it starts with my family and Mariah and how fortunate we've been as a family, but it's also that I decided to hitch my wagon to this industry that was such a young industry, right? The craft brewing renaissance is only really 40 something years old. We kind of date it from when Sierra Nevada opened in 1980 to Jim Cook opening Sam Adams in 82. And so that's the first generation of pioneers. And I got to sit on we have a trade group called the Brewers Association. And I got to get on the board with Jim Cook, with Ken Grossman, the founder of Sierra, and all the people that were the pioneers that I read about when I was writing my business plan. They were only 10 years ahead of me when they opened the first breweries and craft breweries in the country. And so it was a wonderful vantage point to get to know your heroes. And then they elected me to be the chairman of that board. And so they had faith in me and my vision and kind of being one of the younger, louder people in our community. And that led Jim to say, hey, Jim, or Jim said, hey, Sam, I love what you're doing with culinary ingredients. You're kind of the first one to do that. We've never done a collaboration with another American brewery. How about you do a Dogfish and Sam Adams collaboration? So we worked on a collaboration together 8 years before we even combined our company. And I remember going up to Boston, calling Mariah and being like, "Oh my God, these guys are just like us, Mariah. They take what they're doing really seriously, but they don't take themselves too seriously. They love to have fun. They leave their egos at the door. It's a meritocracy." So it just felt really right. But to your point, we really got to kick the tires over a decade of getting to know each other before we merged our companies together.
That's just a strike of brilliance in so many ways because, we probably all know the stats about firms that join forces like that. I know we have to, some people call in other cases a merger and acquisition or whatever. This
Mhm.
is a joining of forces and, two strong businesses coming together. It's, it is knowing that so many don't make it, having 10 years to work together, it probably felt pretty natural to take the next step at that point. Probably was the next evolution of the collaboration, frankly.
Yeah, and it's always the case when and yes, it is a merger because again, Mariah didn't cash out and stop working. We just
Yep.
merged the company. But in the scale of the two companies, Boston Beer was certainly much bigger than
Mhm.
Dogfish. So Mariah and I went in eyes wide open, and we know in most merger scenarios, when two beloved brands merge, it's usually the smaller brand that takes the arrows. This smaller guy, their fans are like, "Oh, you shouldn't have merged with a bigger guy." Now, the fact is, Boston Beer was still only like 2% of American beer business when we merged with them, and we were like 1/20th of 1%. So we were still a David among Goliaths.
Yes.
And as ubiquitous as craft beer seems, and I'm sure your listenership, it's a great stat that every American now lives on average within 10 miles of a local brewery. That's a beautiful thing. But all those 10,000 American owned brewery, and the biggest American owned breweries are our company, Boston Beer, and Yingling. And then all the smaller ones you can imagine, Dewey Beer Company, Iron Hill, name your breweries, all of us collectively, all the American breweries only control 14% of the domestic beer marketplace. Four international conglomerates, Anheuser-Busch, InBev, Molson Coors, Constellation, and Heineken, those four companies control over 80% of America's beer industry. So, support your local indie craft breweries. And when Dogfish and Sam Adams combined, we're still a very small brewery, but just one of the biggest of the American owned breweries.
So I think I'm going to ask this question right. Over the last 30 years, did it kind of go from 0 to 14%? So,
Mhm.
d- small batch got to 14% of the market share,
Yeah, I mean, it never got to 0 because
right?
there was an era when in the 50s and 60s where there were some strong regional American breweries like Rolling Luck and Schlitz and Stroh's. So those regional mid-sized breweries kept our numbers on volume looking pretty good. But when Dogfish opened in 95, there were 600 breweries in America. In the beginning of the 80s when Sierra Nevada opened, there was less than 100 breweries in America. So we'd gone down to almost, less than 100, and now we're back up to 10,000. So it's been a wonderful renaissance to bear witness to and take part in.
Sometimes folks study business and they think that bigger is better, and that as owners of businesses, we just love it as it gets bigger. So, other than like right now, which I know is your favorite time of running this business right now, do you have a favorite phase over the last 30 years?
I mean, it's the wimp out answer is they've all been fun, so I won't do that. I'll say, when we'd get laughed at in the 90s when we would go to beer festivals in New York or Philly, and I'd bring chicory stout made with chicory and coffee, or raison d'etre made with raisins and beet sugars. We'd get laughed at or yelled at because first generation craft beer fans, they wanted like pale ales and lagers and European fresh beer styles, and that was not our mission. So they were mad at us that we're bringing all these exotic ingredients into beer. But we stuck our grounds and we kind of proved this path. And now, if you go into a little tasting room brewery somewhere in America, there's going to be pastry stouts and fruited beers. and stuff that is not, genuflecting to modern European beer styles, that's allowing the brewers to be creative. I'm really proud that in Dogfish Head's formative years, we were kind of the first to focus on that as a brewery, and
Yeah.
kind of became synonymous with what would end up being called extreme brewing. And I wrote a book called Extreme Brewing, and we sponsored a festival annually called Extreme Brewing. And that's kind of what our unique thumbprint that we put on this awesome, diverse community of brewers. So when we were proving out that concept, those were really proud years, because there were a lot of naysayers that said, oh, Dogfish is doing these weird, funky things. They're not treating our traditions respectfully or seriously. But we kind of reminded them that centuries ago, millennia ago, all these different cultures around the world were brewing beers with fruits and herbs and spices on stuffs they could forage in the land that they lived on, and that's how they defined beer. So if anything, we were re-embracing the oldest tradition of limitless creativity when you're conceiving a recipe as a brewer. So that's been really rewarding for us.
I saw that Patagonia brewed a beer that was using a certain
Kernza.
current. Yes, is that?
Yeah.
Were you at all connected to that? And do you
Yeah,
know that
yeah. So we
recipe?
did yeah, that was one of my, as an entrepreneur, one of my, so your listeners that are entrepreneurial business folks, I recommend reading Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia's great book called Let My People Go Surfing. And it's all about creating a great culture that's kind of people first and product second. You take care of your people, they'll take care of what you need to make for products to stay sustainable. And when Patagonia reached out to us and said we want to collaborate on a beer, they were working with this group called the Land Institute that had cultivated this really unique grain called Kernza that is kind of like a wheat. So it yields starches that can be converted to sugar like brewer's barley. So you can ferment it and make beer with it. But it's super deep roots, so it sequesters carbon back in the atmosphere at a rate of 10x what traditional agricultural grains do. So it's good for the environment. So we went and we brewed a special beer, Patagonia lager with them. But it also let me spend a whole day in Ventura, California during Yvonne's annual plan for the next year's Patagonia strategic plan. And I think much to the chagrin of all his C-suite direct reports, he's like, hey, Sam, today we're doing next year's strategy full day retreat. Why don't you just join us? And they're like, this guy's not under NDA. He doesn't know anything about our business, but they let me just sit there and contribute to their next year's strategic plan as a company. And that was one of the most amazing days of my life. And kind of to pay it forward, we've really embraced sustainable grains. Kernza is now one of the featured grains in the beer you're drinking, the hazy pale ale Dogfish Head. Like 10% of the fermentable sugars, and that comes from Kernza. And then our newest Grateful Dead collab called Citrus Daydream, it's made with a sustainable grain from Africa called fonio, which has been cultivated in Africa since before human beings invented the wheel. So it's like the earliest crop in the world, and it too grows in arid places that have challenges with water access. So these sustainable grains is a really nice niche for Dogfish to play in, to kind of give back to the Mother Earth part of what we do.
So I assume that's supporting a farmer on a supply chain who's growing those in some way,
Indeed, yeah,
giving
yeah.
them an
So,
outlet. I
yep,
don't have to ask
and
you
so
that
for
question on that beer. I wrote down what Fonia was and was going to ask. So thank you for sharing that.
Yep, yep. So Fonio's in the Citrus Daydream Dogfish beer, and Kernza's in the hazy pale ale.
And is there music released with the Dead, just in the spirit of that?
Yeah, so Phil Lesh and his sons, who are awesome musicians too, they used to own a live music room in the Bay Area near San Fran called Terrapin Station. And so that's when we did the first launch, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And they introduced me to David Lemieux, who's their full-time,
Archivist, if you will.
exactly. Archivist historian. And he's become a great friend. He's a big fly fisherman. My son's a big fly fisherman. So for the last few years, while fishing, we trade favorite Grateful Dead live tracks, and we're totally like agnostic on what era they came from.
Okay.
Whether it's pre or post Jerry, or and what shows they came from. And our goal is just to create the ultimate set to drink beers and fish to of live Dead songs, and we've turned it into a series of albums called Live from the Back Porch, Dogfish Head and Grateful Dead. And Dogfish is the 11th year that Dogfish has been the official brewery of Record Store Day, which is the national holiday for all indie record stores coast to coast. And the big date is not this weekend, but next weekend. So in the middle of next week, myself, the founders of Record Store Day, and David Lemieux go to New York City, and we're going to do a media presentation about Record Store Day and the new Dogfish Grateful Dead album at Brooklyn Bowl, a great music-centric bar in Brooklyn. And then we're going to have this amazing Dead cover band, really virtuosic jazz musicians called Bushwick's Dead play a live show. Events like that are absolutely what fuels my love of this business that we get to do, and hang out with world-class musicians and fellow entrepreneurs. So we're really excited for those dates next week.
And as a Deadhead, to go toe to toe with David Lemieux and to be able to suggest a song or a year or a show to get it on
Yeah.
there is quite impressive, Sam. So
And
that's
my son, who's 26, and it shows us, and I know you're celebrating an amazing family moment. Why don't you tell the
yes.
group
So
what today is?
just before we hit record, I said, Sam, this is a big day, not much sleep. First time grandfather. I'm sure my daughter would not like me to spell out the details, but let's just say there's an baby boy Jackson now.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how all of a sudden all the little problems seem so small, Sam. Like
Yeah.
they said when you get that baby in your arms, it changes things. And,
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
say it does. I wanted to set up a 529 on the ride back from the hospital, if you will. Like, just amazing stuff. But
So happy for you. I'm glad I'm
thank
part of
you.
this momentous day. And yeah, so for my son Sammy, who's 26, and turning him onto the Dead when he was 8 or 9 years old, and him getting he's into it more than I am. So seeing his name and my name on the album credit next to the name David Lemieux, because my son was suggesting tracks along with myself, and so that's been
It's a
a
family
feather in,
affair.
yeah, a huge moment for me as a career as a brewer, but also as a music fan too.
All right. So we're coming up on 42 minutes. We'll kind of do some wrap on some things, but I did
Sure.
want to, you were talking about just about the competitive landscape when you started the business in 95. And you're probably a little tired of the story, but I love it when you're hanging a sign on your new
Yeah.
restaurant brewery. You're excited. Do you want to take it from there? You're putting this sign up and what
Sure.
happens next?
Sure. I told that story yesterday. I reminded our former wonderful Senator Carper. I mean, he just retired, wonderful man. And I was on the phone with Senator Carper yesterday and telling the story because he was the governor of Delaware in that era. But I was 24 years old, super naive. I'd raised $220,000 to start Dogfish. I rented this building in downtown Rehoboth. It was a location that was pretty much assumed to be cursed and haunted because it had 3 different failed businesses, 3 different years before I took it
But the
over.
rent was cheap, Sam.
And the rent was cheap. They said, "Oh, you'll never make it that far away from the boardwalk." So I got a really cheap rent, or relatively, to capture the moment. I asked Mariah to I was standing on the cab of my pickup truck, which I had up on the sidewalk so I could reach the sign on the on. I was like, "Get a photo of me drilling the old restaurant sign off of our facade and putting up our Dogfish Head sign." So she went back to get the photo, but when I took the old sign off, there was the sign of the other last failed restaurant before the most recent failed restaurant was behind that one. I was just like, "Oh shit,
It's
what are
like
we getting
coats of
ourselves?"
paint, right?
Yeah.
Coat
I was like, "What are we getting at?" So I got the old restaurant sign off, the old 2 restaurant signs off, and then as I'm drilling in the Dogfish sign, a guy walks by and goes, "Dogfish Head Brewery, it's illegal to open a brewery in Delaware. My friends were gonna open one out in Route 1, but when they checked in with the state liquor control board, they said it's illegal." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, shit." So I just got off the roof of my car, and I just got in the car, and I drove to Dover, and I just started asking people, which one of these is the House, which is the Senate, and they directed me in. And that day, I got myself into different senators' offices, and they're like, "You did what, son? You rented a building without checking the laws?" They're like, "Well, you got to write legislation." I was like, "Oh, how do I do that?" And they're like, "Well," and so I started writing, and I found this wonderful lawyer in Wilmington, Dick Kirk, who helped me write. And so I wrote my own legislation, argued it on the floor of the Senate, and it turned out to be a boon for our business because, the News Journal, Delaware Today wrote about this crazy 24-year-old that rented a building and had to quickly change the laws to open a brewery. So and then, then Governor Carper had to sign it into existence, and he did it like 20 hours before we opened the brewery. So story had a happy ending, but a stressful beginning.
It's one of the great things about living in a small state in Delaware like this, and that it truly, it's said all the time around here, you truly can walk into a room and have all the right people to affect change. It's a beautiful thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Carper actually played on my dad's basketball team in the 70s just to
Oh my
really
God.
make it. Like, my dad was, head coach, and I
Yeah.
think so. Apparently Carper had quite a jump shot back in the day.
I can
So
see that. He's a tall, scrappy dude.
absolutely, yeah. So there's always a story behind a story, just like there's always a sign behind a sign, apparently,
It's a
in so many
good
ways,
way to
right?
put it.
Well, in so many ways. All right. Are we hitting the right notes here that you'd like
Yeah.
to cover? All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we touched on it, but I've heard you talk. I love the soundbite where you say I try to work in some exercise every day for my beer calories.
Hmm. Yep.
You've evolved this, but how do you work in, it's not easy to run a business. But what do you do to earn the beer calories?
Well, I would say our best selling beer is 60-minute IPA. So I try not to overthink it. I try to do 60 minutes every day of some sort of robust exercise. And unless I'm on the road and I'm stuck in a shitty little hotel gym, I try to do it in the beauty of the nature. So
Yeah.
my preferred let's say if I was lucky enough to be here in coastal Delaware for 7 days in a row a week, I would in those 7 days paddleboard in the canal, probably 5 of the 7 days, 4 or 5 for 1 hour, 60 minutes, listening to music and taking notes on my iPhone if I have a beer idea. I now have 5 iPhones in the bottom of the harbor because I drop them sometimes. But or 2 or 3 days a week, I get on my mountain bike and I go from my house out into Cape Henlopen and State Park and back. So mountain biking and paddle boarding are my two absolute favorite ways to spend an hour in the morning. And then in about 20 minutes, I'll go downstairs and host a live cam for a National Beer Day, and I'll start earning back my 60-minute calories.
That you don't think that's a big deal. What I like is that you've built a lifestyle where you actually do it. Many
Yeah.
of us think about it. Not that we don't, mine ends up being a walk with the dogs in the neighborhood. It's not paddle
That
boards
counts.
in the canal, So,
That
um,
counts. In the winter, it's hard. Sometimes I have to paddle around ice flows. And one of the things that helped me make it like habitual is it's my New Year's resolution where I say I'm gonna have some sort of salad every day, and I freaking hate salad, but I have some sort of salad every day, and then I give myself 5 days in a calendar year to not work out for 60 minutes. At the beginning of this year, I went and did a collaboration with a brewery in Japan, and I had to add just the flight thing. I couldn't get a workout in, so I'm only 3.5 months into the year, but I'm down one of my 5 days. I can only not work out 4 other days. It sounds pretty obsessive. I think it is, but it's what helps me stick to it is to make it that habitual.
so wrap up with 3 quick questions. If somebody is feeling entrepreneurial and they're in their kitchen and they're brewing beer or they're thinking entrepreneurial today, what handful of advice would you give somebody who is ready to go on their entrepreneurial journey?
I would say uh, research, study, immerse yourself obsessively in the industry you're planning on joining, and do it through the lens of not which of these companies has built the best mousetrap that I should copy, but where's the white space after I've learned everything about this industry. And it reminds me of the Bitches Brew collaboration because I got to spend time with Miles Davis's nephew in Electric Landlady music studio, which was Jimi Hendrix
Hey,
music
Hendrik.
studio in Manhattan, and it's where they recorded Bitches Brew. And so we were playing the original reels of the album, and his nephew was saying that he took that while they were recording, he had a downtime with his dad. His dad was smoking a cigarette, or his uncle Miles, and he asked him, he's like, "Hey, Uncle Miles, how'd you become Miles Davis? There's 1,000 amazing trumpet, jazz musicians, but there's only one you. How did you find that? How'd you do that?" And he said, "Don't play what's there, play what's not there." And I think it's probably the best advice for any entrepreneur is first you got to understand what's there. You got to study your industry rigorously, and then odds are you're going to be tiny as a startup. So you're not going to succeed by just copying someone and overspending them or over executing them in a marketplace that already exists. Your better opportunity to succeed is to find white space where you don't have competitors and you can establish a niche that your brand is synonymous with. And when I think about Dogfish Head's lucky history, it's because we vocally, verbally, proactively promoted ourselves as the first brewery in the country committed to brewing the majority of our beers using unexpected culinary ingredients, fonio, kernza, raisins, apricots, pumpkins. And that's served us very well to differentiate our brand in a universe with 10,000 brands.
Sam, one of the things about you and Miles Davis, which, by the way, listen to some of Miles Davis's last records to support Sam's point about doing what hasn't been done. Don't go on Spotify and listen to his hits. Listen to his later stuff if you want his stuff that hasn't been done before. But
Yeah.
Sam, you naturally gravitated as a foundation to things that were the white space. I think when people force the white space and it's not them, doesn't work as well. So I
Yeah.
would only say Miles found it, you found it. How do you find that white space that you really are and identify with and can get
Yeah.
behind and be authentic with? I mean, you guys are successful because of that authenticity.
Yeah. And I think it's also figuring out ways that you can have a direct and human scale dialogue with your customers, the group that you aspire, you hope will be your customers, and bring them into your process. Hey, I'm thinking about doing something crazy. It's never been done before, and sharing it with them, getting their reactions, and then building off of their initial critiques. And that's something we've done very well at Dogfish. I'm looking out the window in our brewery here at when we started Dogfish, I was on a 11-gallon system, so it made like 2 kegs of 1 keg of beer, really. And now our system here makes 400 kegs every 3 hours. And but downstairs in this building, we have a tiny little brewing system. And if you come to our tasting room or our little brewery in Rehoboth or Milton, there's all these little experimental brews and cocktails that we've made. And we don't put the pressure on those experiments' shoulders that they have to be the next 60-minute or Grateful Dead beer. We allow them just be these small, pieces of artwork that we're sharing with people. And then we let our customers give us the feedback, the critique, and help us decide which of these innovations is worth us trying to scale up and bring out nationally or regionally. So we still, really involve our customers in that creative process, not just trust our gut as we're doing something that's never been done before.
So it's customer centered, and really that customer feedback drives what scales.
Exactly. Yeah. It allows our customers to feel invested in our innovation process. They're allowed, a seat at the table as we decide what we're going to move forward for commercialization.
Who doesn't like to taste success in that sense too? Be a part of it.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
last question. You were 24 when you started this thing, right? What advice would you give that 24-year-old Sam today?
I do. There was one. I always say I'm glad I lived through all the regrets. I wouldn't change any of them because I learned from them, and I wouldn't make that mistake again. But if I'd never made it, I'd make it. But there's one moment when we were just scraping by, anytime we'd save up some money, and I'd be delivering beer in a box truck in Pittsburgh and driving home with a check from the distributor. And I'd call Mariah. She'd be in the office with a baby strapped to a baby Bjorn, doing that week's payroll on Peachtree, shitty like home accounting software. I'd be like, "Hey, Mariah, I got a check from Vicini Distributing for $11,000. Will we cover payroll this month?" And she'd say, "Yes." I was like, "Do we cover it? And can we cash our own checks?" And she'd say, "Yes." And then I'd say, "All right, then can I take half of it and spend it at the scrapyard that I know I pass on my way home?" And that's how we built Dogfish, is just out of used equipment we found in scrapyards and MacGyvered together ourselves. So we didn't go into a lot of bank debt. But there was one moment where I built up $200,000, and I was like, "All right, Mariah, should I use this money to buy a canning line? Because in that era we were only selling bottles, not cans. Or should I buy a giant food truck shaped like a Paul Bunyan's lunchbox and come out with a line of beer infused bratwurst and pickles? And she's like, you should probably buy the canning line. I was like, nah, I'm going to buy the food truck and come out with all this beer infused food. Well, that project didn't really go so well. And then the craft brewing drinkers said, we want beer in cans. So I was about 3 years late to the can beer game because I decided to do this beer infused bratwurst project. So I would tell 24-year-old Sam Calagione, stay away from beer infused bratwurst and get a canning line as soon as you can.
Well, I'm glad I didn't ask the question, what project failed, because I got there anyway.
Yeah.
And you know what's wonderful about that is, I think you know this. I know this. People see success on the surface. They see it. They see it today, and it's refreshing for them to understand and hear what that's like to build a business. And if you have not felt that feeling of Sunday night of how am I going to meet Friday payroll, I don't know if I'd wish that on my worst enemy, but I certainly know an entrepreneur needs to feel it and feel it a lot, and they feel it often. And the first round of success is when you no longer feel that, right?
Yeah.
The big
Yeah.
thing.
It's a great way of saying it. And it's a great, way to end it is for me to say I'm mostly proud that I had so many talented coworkers join this journey and help us navigate those challenging moments. I think there's 45 of us now that have the Dogfish Shark and Shield tattooed somewhere on our bodies, and that shows that we literally wear our hearts on our sleeves. And it's
Yeah.
not just Mariah and I. There's so many dedicated people that live in the community of your listenership that have made the Dogfish brand what it is. And so, I get to go downstairs right now and have pints
Yeah.
with a bunch of them. And it's not lost on me every day how blessed I am to have so many talented people on this journey with me.
Sam, thanks for being on Outside Insights and for the generosity of your words today. I appreciate it very much.
I really enjoyed our chat. Time flies. 60 minutes flies when you're having fun or drinking it fast, Chris. And
Working in
congratulations
60 minutes to earn a workout. Go do it.
and congrats to you on your expanded family, and welcome Jackson to this mortal coil.
Thank you, Sam.